So what are some good examples of scenarios, problems, or conditions where reinforcement learning would be better suited?
So I think there's sort of if I was to try and generalize them as much as I could, then I think there's two general forms of problem that are reoccurring in reinforcement learning. And the first one is what we have sort of, badly described already, but it's the idea of optimizing something. It's the idea of attempting to use RL to help problems that last over a long period of time. So, like trying to let me try and think of a better example than not reinforcement learning. Like, for example, if you were building a social media platform, for example, and one of your primary metrics is engagement, the amount of people that are coming back to your platform over and over again, then you could make changes to your user interface that could significantly hamper that engagement. If people get pissed off at the UX, then they're not going to come back again. So you could use reinforcement learning to learn over time which UI configuration turned out to be the best for user engagement. Okay, so that's kind of one group of examples where you're trying to optimize something over longer periods of time. The second common use case is when there are problems that have a very complex level of control that can't be hand defined, that can't be manually defined. The classic example is something like robotics. So if you tell, and it's often the simplest examples actually that sound really easy to solve, but are actually incredibly complex. And I keep coming back to the idea of pick and place robots. And the idea here is that you have, imagine two, like a conveyor belt, for example, in a box. And the goal is to pick things off a conveyor belt and put them in the appropriate box so they get shipped to your house. Like, instinctively, that sounds like a really simple problem to solve. But actually, trying to teach a robot to pick up an object of an arbitrary shape, like this could be made of cloth, plastic, metal, could be a box, could be a sphere, it could be, all sorts of different shapes. And it turns out that it's nearly impossible to be able to program a robot to be able to do all of those tasks. And instead, you need to teach it. You need to allow it to learn how to do that for itself. And so the way in which they do that, they use reinforcement learning to, repeatedly try and pick up things. And it basically learns from first principles how to pick up an object and put it in a box. And that you can't do that with machine learning because it's not just one task. It's like, many thousands of tiny little motor movements that are getting it into that exact, that right position. And it's pretty much impossible to be able to hand program that. So robotics are a great example of that, but there's many other industrial control systems that kind of have a similar set of problems. For example, in like inventory control is one thing that I recently got interested in, and this is the idea of like, how do we control the stock of items in warehouses? How many do we have? Where do we put them? How do we basically optimize for various different things, whether preventing things going out of stock, improving the organization of the warehouse, so we reduce the amount of time to get frequently bought items and things like that. Again, you could technically attempt to define that statically and try and write all these rules out by hand, but it would definitely be suboptimal, and it's much more efficient to learn these over time.